Arnold Bennett, an introduction. Arnold Bennett was born in 1867 in Hanley, one of the 6 towns that form the Potteries that later joined together to become Stoke-on-Trent, the area in which most of his works are located. For a short time he worked for his solicitor father before realising that to advance his life he would need to become his own man. Moving to London at 21, he obtained work as a solicitor's clerk and gradually moved into a career of journalism. At the turn of the century, he turned full-time to writing, and shortly thereafter, in 1903, he moved to Paris. In 1908, he published to great acclaim The Old Wives' Tale. With this, his reputation was set. Clayhanger and The Old Wives' Tale are perhaps his greatest and most lauded novels. But standing next to these are many fine short stories, and it is to these in this volume we turn our attention. Bennett bathes us in vignettes of life, of characters that, whatever their ambitions, are easy to immerse ourselves in. These stories are read for you by Richard Mitchley.
The Matador of the 5 Towns by Arnold Bennett. Mrs. Brindley looked across the lunch table at her husband with glinting, eager eyes, which showed that there was something unusual in the brain behind them. "Bob," she said, factitiously calm, "you don't know what I've just remembered." "Well," said he, "it's only Grandma's birthday today." My friend, Robert Brindley, the architect, struck the table with a violent fist, making his little boys blink, and then he said quietly, "The deuce." I gathered that Grandmamma's birthday had been forgotten, and that it was not a festival that could be neglected with impunity. Both Mr. and Mrs. Brindley had evidently a humorous appreciation of crises, contretemps, and those collisions of circumstances which are usually called junctures for short. I could have imagined either of them saying to the other, "Here's a funny thing, the house is on fire," and then yielding to laughter as they ran for buckets. Mrs. Brindley in particular laughed now. She gazed at the tablecloth and laughed almost silently to herself, though it appeared that their joint forgetfulness might result in temporary estrangement from a venerable ancestor who was always, birthdays being duly observed, a continual fount of rich presents in specie. Robert Brindley drew a timetable from his breast pocket with the rapid gesture of habit. All men of business in the 5 Towns seemed to carry that timetable in their breast pockets. Then he examined his watch carefully. "You'll have time to dress up your progeny and catch the 2:05. It makes the connection at night for Axe." The 2 little boys, aged perhaps 4 and 6, who had been ladling the messy contents of specially deep plates onto their bibs, dropped their spoons and began to babble about Greek Granny, and one of them insisted several times that he must wear his new gaiters. "Yes," said Mrs. Brindley to her husband after reflection, "and a fine old crowd there'll be in the train with this football match. Can't be helped. Now, you kids, hook it upstairs to nurse." "And what about you?" asked Mrs. Brindley. "You must tell the old lady I'm kept by business." "I told her that last year, and you know what happened." "Well," said Brindley, "here's Loring's just come. You don't expect me to leave him, do you? Or have you had the beautiful idea of taking him over to Axe to pass a pleasant Saturday afternoon with your esteemed grandmother?" "No," said Mrs. Brindley, "hardly that." "Well, then." The boys, having first revolved on their axes, slid down from their high chairs as though from horses. "Look here," I said, "you mustn't mind me. I shall be all right." "Ha, ha!" shouted Brindley. "I seem to see you turned loose alone in this amusing town on a winter afternoon. I seem to see you." "I could stop in and read," I said, eyeing the multitudinous books on every wall of the dining room. The house was dadoed throughout with books. "Rot," said Brindley. This was only my 3rd visit to his home and to the 5 Towns, but he and I had already become curiously intimate. My first 2 visits had been occasioned by official pilgrimages as a British Museum expert in ceramics. The 3rd was for a purely friendly weekend and had no pretext. The fact is, I was drawn to this astonishing district and its astonishing inhabitants. The 5 Towns, to me, was like the East to those who have smelt the East. It called. "I'll tell you what we could do," said Mrs. Brindley. "We could put him on to Dr. Sterling." "So we could," Brindley agreed. "Wife, this is one of your bright, intelligent days. Well, put you on to the doctor, Loring. I'll impress on him that he must keep you constantly amused till I get back, which I fear it won't be early. This is what we call manners, you know. To invite a fellow creature to travel 150 miles to spend 2 days here, and then to turn him out before he's been in the house an hour. It's us, that is. But the truth of the matter is, the birthday business might be a bit serious. It might easily cost me 50 quid and no end of diplomacy. If you were a married man, you'd know that the 10 plagues of Egypt are simply nothing in comparison with your wife's relations. And she's over 80, the old lady. I'll give you the 10 plagues of Egypt, Mrs. Brindley menaced her spouse as she wafted the boys from the room. Mr. Loring, do take some more of that cheese if you fancy it. She vanished. Within 10 minutes, Brindley was conducting me to the doctor's, whose house was on the way to the station. In its spacious porch, he explained the circumstances in 6 words, depositing me like a parcel. The doctor, who had once, by mysterious medicaments, saved my frail organism from the consequences of one of Brindley's Falstaffian nights, hospitably protested his readiness to sacrifice patients to my pleasure. "It'll be a chance for McIlroy." "Who's McIlroy?" I asked. "McIlroy is another Scotsman," growled Brindley. "Extraordinary how they stick together. When he wanted an assistant, do you suppose he looked about for someone in the district? Someone who understood us and loved us and could take a hand at bridge? Not he. Off he goes to Cupar or somewhere and comes back with another stage Scotchman named McIlroy. Now listen here, Doc. A charge to keep you have, and mind you keep it, or I'll never pay your confounded bill. We'll knock on the window tonight as we come back. In the meantime, you can show Loring your etchings and pray for me. And to me, here's a latchkey." With no further ceremony, he hurried away to join his wife and children at Bleakridge Station. In such singular manner was I transferred forcibly from host to host. The doctor and I resembled each other in this, that there was no offensive affability about either of us. Though abounding in good nature, we could not become intimate by a sudden act of volition. Our conversation was difficult, unnatural, and by gusts falsely familiar. He displayed to me his bachelor house, his etchings, a few specimens of modern rouge flambe ware made at Knype, his whisky, his celebrated prize-winning fox terrier Titus, the largest collection of books in the 5 Towns, and photographs of Marischal College, Aberdeen. Then we fell flat, socially prone. Sitting in his study, with Titus between us on the hearthrug, we knew no more what to say or do. I regretted that Brindley's wife's grandmother should have been born on the 15th of February. Brindley was a vivacious talker. He could be trusted to talk. I, too, am a good talker with another good talker. With a bad talker, I'm just a little worse than he is. The doctor said abruptly, after a nerve-trying silence, that he had forgotten a most important call at Hanbridge, and would I care to go with him in the car? I was, and still am, convinced that he was simply inventing. He wanted to break the sinister spell by getting out of the house, and he had not the face to suggest a sortie into the streets of the 5 Towns as a promenade of pleasure. So we went forth, splashing warily through the rich mud and the dank mist of Trafalgar Road, past all those strange little Indian red houses and ragged empty spaces and poster hoardings and rounded kilns and high smoking chimneys, uphill, downhill and uphill again, encountering and overtaking many electric trams that dipped and rose like ships at sea into Crown Square, the centre of Hanbridge, the metropolis of the 5 Towns. And while the doctor paid his mysterious call, I stared around me at the large shops and the banks and the gilded hotels. Down the radiating street vistas I could make out the facades of halls, theatres, chapels. Trams rumbled continually in and out of the square. They seemed to enter casually, to hesitate a few moments as if at a loss, and then to decide with a nonchalant clang of bells that they might as well go off somewhere else in search of something more interesting. They were rather like human beings who are condemned to live forever in a place of which they are sick beyond the expressiveness of words. And indeed, the influence of Crown Square, with its large effects of terracotta, plate glass and gold letters, all under a heavy skyscraper of drag smoke, was depressing. A few very seedy men, sharply contrasting with the fine delicacy of costly things behind plate glass, stood doggedly here and there in the mud, immobilised by the gloomy enchantment of the square. Two of them turned to look at Sterling's motor car and me. They gazed fixedly for a long time, and then one said, only his lips moving, "Has Tommy stood thee that there quart of beer as he promised thee?" No reply. No response of any sort for a further long period. Then the other said, with grim resignation, "Aye." The conversation ceased, having made a little oasis in the dismal desert of their silent scrutiny of the car. Except for an occasional stamp of the foot, they never moved. They just doggedly and indifferently stood, blown upon by all the nipping draughts of the square, and as it might be, sinking deeper and deeper into its dejection. As for me, instead of desolating, the harsh disconsolateness of the scene seemed to uplift me. I savoured it with joy, as one savours the melancholy of a tragic work of art. "We might go down to the signal offices and worry Buchanan a bit," said the doctor cheerfully when he came back to the car. This was the second of his inspirations. Buchanan, of whom I had heard, was another Scotchman, and the editor of the sole daily organ of the Five Towns, an evening newspaper cried all day in the streets and read by the entire population. Its green sheet appeared to be a permanent waving feature of the main thoroughfares. The offices lay round a corner close by, and as we drew up in front of them, a crowd of tattered urchins interrupted their diversions in the sodden road to celebrate our glorious arrival by unanimously yelling at the top of their strident and hoarse voices, "Hooray! Oh, bloody hooray!"